then whatever else fills out the time until 11, we can spend doing this for sure.
That's what I was thinking. Okay, so welcome to the N-API team meeting for May 13th, 2019. We'll follow our standard agenda, which is just to see if anybody has any announcements, and then get on to the things we've tagged for the next milestone. So does anybody have anything they'd like to share? Okay, if not, I'm going to open up the milestone. And I will share that. Okay, so N-API version in Node.js, right. I added that one because I saw that there was a discussion in Node.js. And I thought Jim's experience with working with some of the things might help us there as well. So they want to do conditional compilation based on Node.js feature support. But it sounds like there's no way to figure out which N-API version is supported. So Jim, does that ring any sort of bells or
yeah,
thoughts?
we introduced the idea of a N-API version in Node pre-JIP and in pre-build. Node pre-JIP is built on top of Node.js.
Okay.
So, it might make sense to expose it at the Node.js level.
Right. I don't know enough about Node.js. Is that? Do you think you have enough to sort of look at that and see if
I will definitely look at this, Michael.
Okay, so
yeah, thank you.
We discussed in the team meeting today. Jim mentioned that we added the concept of N-API version to Node. How do I say that? Is that like pre-JIP like this?
Yes, yes.
And Node, what was the other one?
Pre-build.
Pre-build.
It was just it's just the word pre-build with no Node. It's just called pre-build.
Okay. So those two?
Without the hyphen.
Without, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to highlight those.
Yeah.
Team. Am I getting your
SCH
SCH? Okay.
LI. Well, that's weird.
Why that's it may be because this is Node.js, you're not a member there, right?
I'm not a member there, no.
Okay, but as long as that's right.
Yeah. Okay.
That's whether that look good?
Yeah.
Jim, sound good to you?
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay. Thanks a lot for looking at that, because yeah, I think if what you learned on the other ones maybe makes applies to there as well, that would be great.
Well, we can make it consistent across the board.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Submissions to NodeConf EU. I saw, Jim, that you had submitted the one, I think, for
the... Yeah, I put all my notes on a different issue. Probably, I put a bunch of notes on the workshops.
Okay, so
which we should probably link. Yeah. Okay.
I can just look there. So
now, when I did the submission to NodeConf EU, I listed Michael, Gabriel, and Nicola as co-presenters. I put your email in, and I was under the impression they were going to contact you directly. That that the submission system is going to send you an
So
email.
for NodeConf EU, I got an email that said, "Hey, you're being added to the session.
Perfect.
Please
Okay.
accept it." So I
Okay.
got that and said yes. I think
Okay.
I saw
Gabriel-
everybody else's picture, so I assume you guys accepted as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
The same for me.
Okay, very good, very good. Okay, so we're all set there. There's nothing we can do there until they make their decisions.
Sounds
I
good.
think that's open until the end of May, and
Yes.
then they'll start making their decisions.
Yeah.
And then I noticed Node.js Interactive opened up last week.
Yep.
So do we want to make this? We can submit a workshop and we can submit a birds of a feather.
I think if we can submit the same workshop, that makes sense to me.
Okay.
We'll be ready, and probably a different audience, right? That's, NodeConf will likely have more people from Europe, and Node+JS Interactive more from North America. There, of course, some overlap, but I think it's different enough that it would make sense.
Yeah, definitely. If you guys are up for that. So
And the birds of the feather,
remember we did that at Interactive last year. They had those breakout sessions. We hosted a little talk out in the foyer.
yeah.
In Vancouver. So we could, I think we ought to do one or the other. I don't know if it makes sense to do both.
I think it makes, if we think that either one makes sense, it's probably good to submit both, just depending on whether they're looking for more bird of the feathers versus workshops or.
Okay.
The thing is 30 to 40 minutes. Was it that long last year?
I don't think it was that long. I think it was like
Yeah.
20 to 30. What's interesting is they at last year's conference they had breakouts, and we called ours a birds of a feather, and now they're not doing breakouts, they're doing birds of a feather.
Okay.
So anyhow, what I'll do is I will post an abstract for birds of a feather based on the one we did the breakout we did last year.
Right. Now, I think the discussion we had earlier was to maybe generalize it as well for the birds of a feather to be a bit more like it could be an add-on birds of a feather.
Native
With
add-ons.
Yeah, native add-ons birds of a feather with a flavor of N-API, right?
Okay, good.
Because that just strikes me as like if there's people,
Okay.
We thought it made sense for the other one. I'm thinking it will be for this one as well.
Okay. And Nicola and Gabriel, are you up to be included for that proposal?
I'm certainly game, though
Okay.
I don't know how well I will actually be able to attend, but
Okay.
provisionally, I think I'm good.
Okay, absolutely. And Nicola?
Yeah, the same for me.
Okay, perfect. But I'll post the abstract for the birds of a feather before I do any posting.
Yeah, and I think that in the birds of feather, we can talk about all what happened in native environment this year, for example. So just to don't repeat ourselves if we will do the workshop. I don't know if you.
Yeah, I think we can figure out if they end up saying let's do both, we can figure out how to make them interesting enough differently.
Yeah.
Sort of like even in the birds of a feather, I think covering some of the things that Gabriel had in his blog post.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talking about these are some of the things that the project has worked on, which are not NAPI specific, but in the birds of a feather, it's like, hey, does that resonate with people? Are there other ones like that? And then we can also talk about NAPI and adoption and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think if we do a workshop on add-ons, then we should definitely emphasize not only NAPI itself, but also the sort of the advent of worker threads and how that influences state management in an add-on.
Yeah,
I think that's very important. It's becoming ever more important. So basically, global static variables are a big no-no because of that.
Yep.
And people need to get used to that. And also
Yeah.
proper cleanup at the end.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, making it a generic, add-ons, birds of a feather, we can, an API certainly will still be one of the things we're pitching, that particular topic, and any others that we can think of that we want to sort of say in terms of building your native add-ons. Be good. I've created a new issue. I'm creating a new issue here just so that we have a one that says, hey, we've got a deadline.
Yeah.
And Jim volunteered to submit the workshop and put together the abstract. Okay, and I think this other one that we were looking at, we can probably then close, right? Because it sounds like you've submitted.
Yeah. We might link it to the other issue.
Yeah, okay, here, where was that? That's good. When was that? Workshop, right?
Yes.
I don't know, do we still need that other one open? Are people submitting other things as well for New Coffee U? Like, I don't know, Nicola or Gabriel, were you planning? Oh yeah, I see, Gabriel, you were planning a talk, Life and Talk Reserve a Native Add-on. Have you already submitted that one?
No, I haven't yet. I'm kind of snowed in right now. I'm gonna try to find time for it.
Okay, so maybe we should leave this open just as a reminder if you.
Yeah.
Okay, and I guess Nicola, have you submitted the one that you?
Yeah, see, please.
Yes, you have submitted that one, or?
No, not
No. Okay.
yet.
Okay, so we'll leave this open as a reminder to say, okay, you
Yes.
two are still planning to submit those two ones. Okay. Right. So. Right. N-API version workshop. Submissions to Node Coffee U. So anything more to talk on those before we move on?
We're good from here, Michael.
Sounds good. Separate or additional package. I think this.
Yeah, we have a pull request open at Node.js N-API.
Yeah, let me find that.
And you approve it, and Hitash asking to be promoted.
Okay, so where is this one, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that one's, is there any reason, like, okay, you reviewed it, all your things were addressed, right? I'm thinking this is just doc, right? So let's just land it. Here, I guess I have to log in, don't, is that my problem? No, here. Okay. And this guy, right? PR with and I think related, there was an issue this week, which I don't know, last week, I don't know how it's going to turn out in the end, but there was like some functionality. It looked like there was a place, a bug in the async worker implementation. And Anna put a PR to fix that, but then it ended up breaking 8. Fixed 12, broke 8, and I think still last it looked like it might have been still related to that sort of the finalization, where we've had a few PRs to try and fix memory leaks and stuff around that. But the reason I mention it here is I think that actually pushes us towards the approach we've taken, which is sort of minimal wrapper, because the more you have in the wrapper, the higher the likelihood that there's a bug there. And I think bugs there might then force you to have to recompile, versus if there's a bug in N-API itself and we fix it in the VM, you don't necessarily have to recompile to get that fix. Whereas in the wrapper, you of course do have to recompile to be able to get that. So making there be less in the wrapper makes, I think, sense from that perspective as well. Right, so this one I think we can now close, right? Everybody agree? I did close it, okay. Possible advantages to take advantage of LibView stability. This is actually quite a ways back. I don't see anything new.
Yes, because in the week when you last week we talked with the CR port maintainer, and he asked for UV port support on an API.
Okay. So it's not very complex. So that's right. Is that all they would need to make serial port N-API dependent?
Yeah, for what I understood, yes.
Yeah, that's the biggest stopper for them. But it's not really a stopper. They're just concerned that it's going to break. Even though an API doesn't break, it will break. And so that's why I was asking about whether there's any chance that UV Pulte is going to break. As a result of a possible libuv 2.0 release. Because, I mean, okay,
right.
if there are ABI breaks, that doesn't mean every single API will be incompatible. It's just, the ones that break. And so that's why I asked Colin, but he passed the buck to Ben, and I haven't seen any reaction from Ben yet. Right.
Now, I assume as well, like UV Pulte, there's a whole bunch of APIs that uses that, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I guess I was asking about that whole group of APIs.
Because it would be that would be my question, is like, how much, if that was to be added to an API, like how many new functions would that end up being?
Right. And it would be pretty one-to-one with libuv.
Right. If it was one or two and it solves a big problem so that many more native modules could then rely on an API, I could see it making sense. If it's like a whole whack of them, then you're like, well, wait a sec, where do you stop with it, with libuv wrapping, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And besides, if we start wrapping one-to-one, especially a big enough chunk of libuv, then we are,
right.
committing ourselves to the same shortcomings that libuv itself has, which is the original reason for breaking it.
Right. Yep.
So, if we wrap, we need to wrap carefully.
Yeah, I agree. It comes back to your earlier idea, I think, of if we could have separate numbers so that you could say, well, I'm using an API, but this binary works as long as you're using an API and this version of libuv, for example, right?
Yeah, but the thing is, like, I mean, that becomes ever more granular too, right? Like, at some point, you end up with a situation where you are essentially duplicating every single API and assigning a number to every single API, and at that point, you're just trying to deal with the complexity by reintroducing the complexity. At that point, you might as well just let the add-on crash and let that tell you that there's an ABI incompatibility.
Well, except the crash, like crashing is not good because that's usually painful.
No, obviously, yeah. But what I'm saying is that you're trying to prevent the crash at a cost that is so high in terms of complexity that it's just not worth implementing that. you know, because you get so many numbers. I mean, you know, do we sort of section off UV pol T and assign it a number? You know, because I mean, because then if we don't, then even though UV pol T isn't broken, you know, the add-on will need to be recompiled because it'll refuse to load because the version of libuv, which happens to be perfectly compatible with the add-on because the add-on only uses UV pol T, is now different. Right?
Yeah, well, yeah, but you're right. We can't go all the way, but I think like libuv actually wouldn't be that, you know, when was the last breaking change that there was?
Many
Right. So like,
ago,
if there's a semper major every couple of years, then actually being able to say, well, you can use it, and as long as, you know, as long as it hasn't changed, that actually still has value, right?
Exactly, and even if it does, even if a new semper major is released, it does not break the entire API, you know. So you know, it's basically a case by case situation, right? Like some modules will continue to be ABI compatible, right, whereas others will not, and so then your only choice is to be reactive about it, you know, and just handle the bug reports and say, oh, okay, fine, I'll do another release. But with an API, the number of such bug reports will still greatly decrease, right? Because you know, all the engine stuff isn't going to break anymore, at least, you know.
Yeah.
And UV or libuv being as stable as it has been, even if a new major is released, not everything will break, you know, because, you know, they'll break what they have to break. They are not being liberal about what they're breaking. And,
right. So you're arguing the protection is worse than the cure. Like
it seems,
the cure is worse than the right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like saying just don't run at all is actually worse than just running and crashing because that's going to be infrequent enough.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that we are sort of approaching that inflection point as well, right? Where you don't really need the versions anymore, you know, and you don't need to intentionally throw upon trying to load the module because chances are that it'll be far more stable than it was in the past. So yes, that's true. However, even if you crash, you know, yes, crashing is bad and a graceful exit is preferable, but the crashes will be far fewer and further in between now, right?
Well, yeah, that's what I think you're making the case for, like today, we basically say you can use an API, but only if you're only using an API things.
Exactly. And you know, we could say, okay, go ahead and use other libraries, right? Because the rate at which ABI incompatibilities will be reported is greatly reduced by the introduction of an API. It's not eliminated, but it is greatly reduced, right? Because a major component is now ABI stable, whereas it wasn't before.
Yeah, true.
So, yeah, it's a tough call to make. But you know, going in the direction of introducing even more version numbers may not be the right solution.
Okay. You know? No, that's an interesting perspective on that. It's like, does it? Yeah.
Yeah, because like we introduced the module version numbers precisely to sort of keep keep the health of the ecosystem up, right? But now they are no longer relevant because, well, we have version numbers now, but they change much more slowly, and the major version, you know, unless there's a break in the language, it is unlikely to change, you know. So
yeah, so right. Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, so I think we still need to figure out the strategy on that front.
Yeah.
Because like I would have been thinking that, well, you know, we still say to be safe, you shouldn't. But there is an argument, like you said, to say, well, is that being safe costing you more than the value of avoiding the crashes or something?
Yeah. Because as soon as we impose a decision as to whether to refuse to load the module, we are bound to run into corner cases where we make the wrong decision, you know, and then you know.
And if you make the wrong decision more often than not.
Yeah. You know, and I mean, the only way we can make the correct decision every time is to associate a version number with every single symbol, you know?
Yeah,
And
which
then,
we're not going to do. That's crazy.
yeah, I mean, that's out of the question. But, you know, on the other hand, this is a language limitation if you think about it, because
Yeah.
you know, C could be what is that called, reflexive enough to give you
Right.
that info, you know.
Yep.
And you know, we could have a formalism for ABI versioning, but I mean, that's beyond the scope. I mean, that's just beyond the scope, you know.
Right.
That's something that would belong in a library loader, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Okay. So well, that's interesting.
And I think we are already kind of we already kind of have a little bit of graceful degradation, in the sense that, you know, it will fail with an exception if there's a missing symbol. Like the app will keep running. It's not going to like crash hard, you know, if there's a missing symbol in the shared object. The require will simply fail. So it's not going to have a nice message. It's just going to have, you know, missing symbol. But
Right. But there are other kinds of changes that would be Semper Major, but wouldn't fail that way, I think.
Yeah. No. The worst. Yeah, and the original reason for having this versioning system is the subtle crash where you just get a sec fault and you don't know why, all of a sudden. Yeah, and yeah. So basically, for those, you know, given that we've adopted this ABI stability commitment, and given that we are placing much more value on ABI stability in general, even outside of an API, you know, that's where the trade-off starts to come in. Like, you know, can we just pedal back and say, hey, those crashes are acceptable because there's going to be a lot fewer of them, you know?
Right.
Or, you know, because the module system is starting to, or the module versioning system is starting to become too rigid. It's driving churn to some extent now.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, you have to rebuild your binary even when you don't have to.
Yeah, for no good reason. Yeah.
Right.
Or very often for no good reason. And so the very good reason, you know, is it worth paying the price at the time when you rebuild the binary for no good reason? You know, is that a small enough price to pay in exchange for not having these subtle crashes?
Right.
You know?
Now, I guess though, like, does what we have in Node.js and pre-build, like, can you do the right thing? Like, so for example, okay, you've decided you're using an API, so there's no new version of an API, but you know that in this version of Node you're going to crash.
For what reason would you crash?
Well, because, you know, you're using libuv and libuv has changed something.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. Then you wouldn't have any information about that, except to know that you crash. Okay, so then you need to. Okay, I see. You need to inform a pre-build and Node pre-jip to create two different versions at this arbitrary point in the version history.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, and there's no way to inform them of that.
Yeah,
that's true.
Or it's not. Yeah, it's like, can you tell the tools to do the right thing is the question.
Well, presumably, if there's going to be a new major release of libuv, it's going to coincide with a new major release of Node. So at that point, the tool would be able to handle that, right? Because, like, well, no, it wouldn't, right? It wouldn't be able to handle that because you're only keying on an API, right?
Yeah, the N-API version.
Yeah, and that doesn't change. Is it
possible to use both of them?
Both.
Or, like, you know, basically you want to say that if it's version and Node version X or later and an API version do something, right?
But it doesn't, right? It doesn't, you know, so far the Node module version, sorry about that. Sorry guys, I got to take this.
Okay.
I'll be right back in 5 minutes.
But Jim, like, I think we added new variables, right? But weren't those variables usable in terms of names and stuff?
Yeah.
I guess the thing is, though, that as soon as you use them in the name, you get a new binary for every Node version too, probably.
Yeah. The code I added would permit you to, well, let's see. Let me think here. It would fire off multiple builds, one for each N-API version, and then it would communicate the N-API version into the code using a macro, a define.
Right.
So it might, and there has been some question about the ability to support N-API and NAN build simultaneously. So that it's something that I need to research, but I felt confident that there was a way to do that. So if we could support that, then we might be able to support multiple builds based on the Node version.
Right.
So then the Node version and the N-API version could be communicated into the C code, and then the C code could do conditional builds
Right.
based on that. So it seemed to me at one point when I looked at it that you could simultaneously do a series of N-API builds and a NAN build.
Okay.
So since I'm looking at this for Node.js, it's something else I can look at.
Okay.
This is kind of a context switch for me to get my head back into that.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we're having this discussion because I can look at that at the same time.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense because, I mean, I think it's almost like you want to say between these Node versions, then I'm going to use the N-API version.
Right.
Because you basically say, okay, when I hit this Node version, I'm using libuv. I'm using libuv, and I know outside of the protection of the number that, hey, there's a new thing in libuv which breaks me.
Yeah.
It's at this point, it's not a hard, if there is a new libuv that doesn't break you, you don't worry about it. But if there is, you can then put it in terms of what you generate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it makes some sense. Okay. So that was some discussion. It sounds like it almost sounded like I think I saw some other discussion that Francis might start working on an API port minus the libuv stuff. Was that what was discussed last week, or?
He was very motivated to get an N-API version going. So I would suspect that he's plowing ahead independent of this.
Okay, good. Yeah, I tried to spend some time starting that, but never really got too far. So it'd be great if they push that forward. Okay. I'm just looking back through the one thing we don't have here, which I think we should, but maybe we closed the issue because it had other things, and it was the, or maybe I'm not looking in the right spot anymore. Oh yeah, the SQLite port.
Yeah, okay, so we're at a point where the vast majority of the unit tests are passing. There's a handful that are failing. Okay. So my approach has always been to get into LLDB and step through the code and figure out what's going on. I'm having difficulties making that work, and so I'm thinking, Michael, it might be good if we were able to schedule a time where we could brainstorm. I don't know if when you were working with Anisha and Samson, I don't know how hands-on you were with them, but what I need help is getting my development system set up so that I can debug why these handful of unit tests.
Sure. Yeah, no, we should be able to get the debugger to break.
Okay.
Yeah, we should be able to do that. Like the module needs to be compiled in debug mode.
Yeah.
And then I have had some tricky stuff, but I think if you basically like start the debugger and then say run the program, like set the breakpoint and then run, we should be able to get that working.
Right. Okay. So where I'm at right now is in a couple days I leave for 2 back-to-back trips.
Okay.
So I'll be back in about 2 weeks, and maybe we could schedule time then, Michael.
That works for me because next week I'm off at a conference and the week after I'm actually gone too. So
Okay, perfect.
maybe that's 3 weeks then, though. But no, if you're leaving next week, then yeah, we're gone the same 2 weeks roughly.
Okay.
Excellent.
We have Kevin and Hitesh among the attendees. Maybe you can promote them.
Okay. Sorry, let me find that.
There is Kevin either.
Yeah, sorry about that, both of you. Since we just promoted you, was there anything you were trying to say or interject in the meantime?
Yeah, Kevin was saying that it would be changing the single NAPI version to like some sort of semver versioning system based off of the underlying libuv semvers. And I think the general picture here is that the semver changes as often as the most often changing semver.
Right. And is that, I was kind of thinking when you guys were kind of talking about how you would already have two kind of different versions, one for the N-API version and one for the libuv version, to me it was kind of sounding like, would it be possible just to have two, like a semver versioning of N-API instead of having just this one scalar single version that we currently have?
We already have versioning for NAPI, right? Like we have NAPI version 1, 2, 3, and 4 out right now, and those are actually the fully qualified semver version of those will be like 1.1.0, 1.2.0, 1.3.0, 1.4.0.
Yeah, because they're non-breaking.
Exactly.
The whole reason we were talking about having two numbers is because, you know, we hope that like for 80% of modules who don't use libuv, you know, it isn't semver. So like if you're just using an API, there's no semver major. You just continue to use it. It's additive. What we're trying to figure out is okay, libuv doesn't change that often. So if you do use libuv, maybe a second number would make sense so that you could say it's kind of like each add-on could opt into the additional things they use. So if you just use NAPI, then you're not going to be broken. If you choose to use NAPI and libuv, then you could indicate that and say, well, I'm dependent on libuv version X. And then
so how Gabe was explaining how the current version means we have 1.1.0 or 1.2.0, we wouldn't want to put this libuv in the minor version.
No.
Which would mean putting it as two. No, okay.
Yeah, like
I
know. For it to help. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Libuv is basically orthogonal to an API, right? So we cannot.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. My bad.
But then Gabriel's point is like, okay, but then you add one for OpenSSL, you add one for HTTP, and you end up with a large number of numbers.
And even with that large number of numbers, you still force people to rebuild their thing, even though in their particular use case it hasn't really broken, right?
Okay.
So there's still that unnecessary churn, right? And the more stable things become in general, the fewer libraries break, and the less often they break, the more the churn is something you want to avoid, because the price you pay in terms of these subtle sec faults is ever smaller with increasing ABI stability.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I see. And then another thought that I had that I just wanted to bring up, I guess, was that you guys were talking about wrapping that UV pull T, and it's possible that maybe there may be a breaking change in UV that we wrapped, and now our wrapper was broken.
But now we have an opportunity to pave over that, right?
Right.
Okay.
So
that's kind of
we can implement the wrapper differently internally without changing its surface. So
correct.
Having the wrapper gives us an opportunity to keep things constant while things underneath change in theory. But on the other hand, bottlenecks which stem from the design of the underlying API we will face if we simply propagate the underlying API and we just add one layer of indirection above it, which simply just calls through. So we don't want to inherit the bottlenecks, and we don't know the bottlenecks ahead of time, right? So yeah, we could add sort of a relief valve, but ultimately that comes with its own price, So we have to make a very, very careful decision,
Right.
And so far, correct me if I'm wrong. So far, what we've been doing is that we've sort of wrapped commonly used concepts rather than low-level tools.
Yeah, like it's a trade-off between, if you went to the extreme and said, well, we'll wrap all of libuv, then you're like, well, wait a second, shouldn't we be trying to make libuv itself stable?
Yeah.
And at the other end, if you wrap one function and that's so widely used that it means that all but 1% of the modules can now use it without having to worry, it makes sense. So it's like, in the case of this one, I was kind of asking earlier, like, well, is it one API or is it like 30 APIs? Because for me, that makes is part of the biggest decision as to whether it would make sense to pull it in or not. And I suspect that one with pull, because you can pull sockets, you can pull file handles, is probably going to be quite a big number of functions, unfortunately.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that was it for me then.
Okay. So I think just while you were on the call, Gabriel, I don't know if you caught it, but Jim is going to think a little bit about what we've done in pre-JIP and pre-build, since he was already volunteered to look at that in terms of Node.js, just to see if we think that what's already there would let you do the right thing. If, for example, you decided to depend on libuv and there was a breaking change, like could you use the existing information to generate, the set of binaries you would need?
Yeah. That's definitely worth looking at, because I suspect that libuv also has like a version declared in its headers and stuff. So then if that can be harvested and interpreted as part of the build process, the pre-build or Node pre-JIP process, then that could also be used to key the name of the module.
Well, I think you can actually figure that out from the Node version.
Yeah. Oh, good point. Yes.
But
yes,
then can you actually come up with a mechanism using the information that's there so that you get binaries only, it's sort of like, for this range of Node versions, I want to use the N-API version within that.
Yeah.
But at the next one, I want to use I want to create a different one. And I'm not sure the tools can do that, but sort of that's what Jim's going to figure out for us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like if the realistically, if we do key by N-API version, which we already do, and we also key by libuv version, then realistically, the libuv version is not going to change very soon and very often. So even if we do that, we are as stable as we are now, right? And we will be able to respond to an incoming breaking libuv in the future using tools that everybody's already familiar with. So there's definitely value in that. Even if we have this extra churn where the module that is currently going through Node pre-JIP or Node pre-build is one that wouldn't really be broken if we didn't have the concept of tracking libuv. Even if it's one of those modules, actually one of those, like even if it's one of those modules, it will, it's still a smaller price to pay, because libuv doesn't change that often. Right?
But I'm thinking, based on your argument, you'd really want to be able to just say, I want a breakpoint at this Node version, because then you could decide whether it had broken you or not.
True. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So basically, it's like, I up between this version and this version, I want you to use N-API to decide what you need to build, but there's a breakpoint, and then for the next range, and so you can look at it and say, yeah, okay, I'm using libuv, I'm using OpenSSL, but even with the new versions, it's fine.
That's an excellent idea, actually. That's an excellent idea. Let the module declare the breakpoints rather than try to infer the breakpoints.
Right.
That's a great idea.
But what we're not sure is whether you can do that, right? So.
Oh, but wait a second. The breakpoint. No, you can't. No, because I mean, right now it's basically it decides from the headers what to build, right? And from the declarations you made in your package JSON. So you are sort of kind of already declaring, but node version isn't the only thing that advances. Because you have like the Electron scenario and you have like the Debian scenario where it's ABI incompatible even though it's the same node version.
Right.
So but still being able to provide a description of the breakpoints in terms of all node versions, would be really useful. Like basically make me a binary for node module version X, N-API version Y, libuv version Z, and then that's one descriptor, and then you have another descriptor for this, for another combination of version, and then basically you tailor your binaries to your audience,
right?
And which binary covers which interval in which dimension,
right.
So yeah, being able to fully specify this using Node pre-build and Node pre-jip would be absolutely useful, I think. Because I mean, you could even, thinking ahead, you could even like break at a minor version if you know that your module is being hit by some really subtle incompatibility that's not even considered semper major by the community, but which happens to break your module. So yeah, that would be super awesome if we had complete descriptors that these tools understood. And then basically that would also motivate developers to use these tools, because otherwise, they wouldn't be able to handle this as well, because if you don't use pre-build, then whatever binary your users built from source is the binary they're stuck with, and if they move across one of these breakpoints, it's going to break for them.
Yeah, so I think it's learning. Jim will learn what we could and couldn't do, and then we can think about it a bit more.
Yeah, that's an awesome idea.
Okay, I think so. Focus on async worker. Opening that one up, and we had several discussions on that, and I think we worked through a number of the issues that we just have to get time to push some of those forward. I don't know if there's any more. Okay, I don't see anything too much on that. We probably need to, maybe next time we only have 4 minutes left, but maybe next time if we have more time, we can take a look at that one again and see what our next steps are. Okay. We talked about SQLite port, burn down list of issues. Any particular ones? I mentioned that one other one. Any others that people want to call out this time?
We closed the issue with calling N-API async queue like N-API queue async work more than once with a documentation fix.
Okay.
And I've assigned the test exception breakage with a debug build to myself. I'll try to get to take a look at that in the coming week.
Okay, sounds good.
If we have a little bit of time, I've been working with Jinho with thread safe functions. Gabe, if you have some time to look over that, we kind of we're stuck at a point where how you mentioned, like the object itself cannot be responsible for knowing whether or not it has to be aborted. So we're stuck at this point where the thread safe function, if you have a reference for it and then you overwrite the reference, then you've kind of lost this open thread safe function, and you don't know whether it's like Node still has the reference for it, so the thread safe function is still open, but but you've overwrote the reference. So we were wondering, like, I don't know, I was looking at the other things that use this sort of suppress destruct and whatnot, where the programmer explicitly states whether or not to destruct it on destruction. But the problem is we don't know if it would be the same as abort, you know, because for a thread safe function, you can either release it or abort it. And I don't know if it makes sense if you would have this suppress destruct functionality be mimicking this abort or not. Like that's currently where we stand. So if you have some time to look at that or anything.
Yeah, honestly, my overall impression here regarding the thread safe function is that we cannot really add too much value as a wrapper, precisely because we cannot have any instances which have a life of their own. You know, like
exactly.
If you, the only thing we can do really, I think, is maybe provide some convenience, like implicit casts and that kind of thing, you know. But we cannot. I don't even think we can store like per instance variables, because if we do, then you have to worry about the instance lifecycle, right? And the thread safe function lifecycle is entirely managed by the N-API implementation. And maybe it's a shortcoming of the implementation that the instance that it doesn't give you a callback for when the instance is about to be like destroyed. You know, it's just kind of assumed that Node takes care of that, or the N-API implementation takes care of that. So that actually may be something that we should do for
there is that finalize callback. Would that be
true? That's true. There is a finalize.
Yeah. We have the finalize callback, and I was thinking, like, could we wrap something over the finalize callback? But I don't know if that's an option. Like, I really don't know that much about what we can do. So
I believe so. I'd have to. Yeah. Okay. Wait. The finalize callback is a standard N-API finalize callback, meaning it takes an environment as the first parameter, which means it's running on the main thread, right?
Yeah. And it gets called when all of the thread safe all of the functions have released it, or one has aborted it, and everyone else is called. Yeah.
So basically it says that I'm about to deallocate this object.
Right.
So yeah, that's a safe hook then. It's not a thread safe hook because all the threads have already released it. So you can that will like hooking into that will ensure that some code runs on the main thread when it's time to destroy things. So you know, if you don't do the thing where you like track has it been aborted and so forth, and you track that in a non-thread safe fashion, if you don't do that, then yeah, you should be able to store state on there, you know, in a non-thread safe fashion, in your own object. So the wrapper can have state of its own as long as the state is read-only to all the other threads, you know.
Right. Okay.
So you cannot make decisions on that state from any thread except the main thread, and you can only make decisions on the state in the finalizer. That's basically the restriction. But if that gives you a lifecycle callback, a useful lifecycle callback, then that's fine.
Okay. Perfect. All right. I'll talk to him about that then to see what he says. All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, great. If that's it, then we'll call it for today. And maybe I'll catch up with you some other time, or I guess, Gabriel, maybe you want to try like just starting up a meeting and seeing if you can start the video going, because I won't be here next Monday.
Okay.
So if you just want to validate that, and if you have any problems, let me know so we can make sure that you're up and running for next Monday.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try to start up this meeting probably in about 2 hours, like 2 hours from now.
Perfect.
All right. Cool. Thank you.
Okay.
I will be absent the next 2 weeks.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be gone next week, but I'll be back for the Monday after that.
Okay, great. Oh,
Okay.
the Monday after that is Memorial Day in the United States.
Oh,
Okay.
Michael.
Okay, so there might be the only one.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
All right. Okay, thanks, guys.
all right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Talk to everybody later.
All
Bye.
right. Bye.
Oh.
Bye.